Hello, and welcome to this video that asks and then hopes to answer to some degree the question, what is this thing called life? It would appear that many of us, from the time we come here until we're 30 or 40 years of age, don't tend to concern ourselves with many of life's age-old questions, or with thoughts of our own mortality, or of whether there may be an afterlife or not. However, one could also say that as the years of life unfold like the petals of a rose, so too does the human heart open itself to thoughts of God. Often, as many of us near the age of 45, 50, or 60 and begin to approach the sunset years of our lives, we more often find ourselves reflecting from time to time on the life that we have lived. And we find ourselves asking some of those age-old questions sometimes. We may wonder what we have accomplished in this life. Some people consider even further, wondering why we come here to this life. What happens to us afterward, and what purpose, if any, is there to all of this? Perhaps in this video, some light can be made to shine in a few of those dark corners. Let us now ask, what is this thing called life? Is it an illusion? Is it a dream, a state of mind, or perhaps even a state of consciousness? With a little thought, perhaps we can bring some light to bear on this most interesting phenomenon that, when carefully considered, is actually thought by many to be rather miraculous in its nature. It should be stated at this time, however, that even though the information and ideas here, like those elsewhere in this series of videos, may not be in agreement with your own, it is nevertheless hoped that you will find the information both interesting and, for you, worthwhile. Be it known that God, by whatever name you may know Him, is the source of all things. From that source we have come, and we are constantly working at one level of our existence or another, at one level of our consciousness or another, in preparation to return to that source in a state that is more perfect or perfected than the state in which we left. What is described here encompasses a portion of that preparatory work. Another way to say this is that the so-called fall of man took place when we dropped or fell from a higher level or frequency of existence to a lower frequency or level of existence into the material physical world. Here we choose to come, incarnation after incarnation, in order to learn and eventually master the lessons that life in this world or plane of existence has to offer, and to eventually return to God the Source in a more perfected state than when we left. Before coming to this physical earth plane, we exist in that place that is often called the other side. Our existence there takes place in a frequency range that is higher than the frequency range for this physical plane, meaning that range of vibratory frequencies on the electromagnetic scale that is far too high for our five physical senses to realize. Therefore, we are unaware of that higher level of existence from our conscious level in the physical world. Conversely, however, we are aware from the higher level existence of the range of vibratory frequencies that can be realized by our five physical senses. Just as we are unable in a single incarnation to learn all the lessons that life in this material world has to offer, neither also is the knowledge needed to advance in our higher existence learned all at once. We do the work there on that higher level that we are able to do, and then, when we're ready, we make the decision to advance to the next higher level. We then work there to prepare ourselves for advancement to an even higher level of existence and work which then prepares us for a yet higher level, and so on. As previously stated, this takes place at a higher level of existence whose frequency is much higher than the frequencies of the material world of existence. That is, the material world, the frequencies of sound, visible light, the things we can feel to the touch, smell, and so forth. Before we move to each higher level, we must make a decision whether or not we have fully prepared ourselves to take that step. This is on the higher level now. Because if we do advance and at that higher level make a mistake, an error of some sort, the higher the level where we are, the more serious are the consequences of making such an error. We must therefore decide whether we are fully prepared to move to that next level, or whether we need additional preparation that could require us to go once again back to school, in a sense, by reincarnating here on the physical plane. In many cases, the decision is made to reincarnate here once again on the physical earth plane. Although there are obviously many exceptions, this is generally a cycle of approximately 140 years, about 70 of which are spent on the physical plane, with generally a similar amount of time on the higher plane. The time spent on each of the in each of these locations or planes can vary depending on what may be needed by the personality involved for that particular incarnation. Now, once the decision is made that additional lessons are needed, and that to learn those particular lessons we need to reincarnate in this particular time on the physical plane of this earth, we must then reach agreement with other entities, whom we then choose to be our mother and father on the physical plane, and appropriate arrangements must be made with those entities. Now, once they've been born onto the earth plane of existence as baby children, the necessary years have passed to allow them to grow up and become together as adults. Then, when the mother's pregnancy is at hand, if that embryo is to have the body that we are to inhabit, then we, at a higher level of our existence, become involved in creating the body which is needed and which has been chosen for the life experiences that are needed by the personality of that incarnation, even to the point of choosing the RNA and DNA for the embryo to be. We also make many other decisions about the formation of the body in which we will later enter and reside at the first breath of birth. These decisions are based upon the knowledge that we possess at that higher level regarding the lessons that we need on the earth plane. For example, if we have in past incarnations been uncaring or unfeeling or without compassion or even cruel to any particular individual or to any segment of the population, such as people of color or people of low economic status or people who have been challenged with physical or mental difficulties, we may decide at that higher level that there's a need for us in that new body, which will be ours, to have the same life experiences that we have approached incorrectly in our dealings with them in the past, when dealing with others. The parents that we choose by coming to agreement at that higher level with those personalities, and the life experiences that will likely be surrounding the family unit, are chosen with all of these matters having been considered and agreed to by the parties concerned. This allows us to have the opportunity to learn the needed lessons by, in effect, walking in the other person's shoes during this particular lifetime. We may therefore choose, meaning we at that higher level make the choice, to create and live in a body of color, or to be a person in poverty, or a person who is mentally and or physically challenged, or with other situations. Many others are possible, many combinations. It is generally with our knowledge of these things, as indicated, that our higher self chooses, reaches agreements with, and makes arrangements with those who will be our parents. Now, sadly, there are people even today who have yet learned so little of the lessons of compassion and love that they will hear the statements immediately preceding this and conclude that anyone whom they see in difficulty is there only because that's where they deserve to be and have chosen to be, and therefore why bother to feel compassion or even care? This is a very unwise approach. Such an unfeeling and uncaring attitude is a reflection of a lack of humanity or of important lessons not yet learned, and is certain to bring negative karmic repercussions. Equally certain to bring negative karmic repercussions, however, is the incorrect idea that we should meddle in the lives of others without their knowledge or consent, or worse yet, perhaps even against their will. These matters are delicate in their nature and must be considered very carefully. Now, getting back to those decisions that we, at a higher level, meaning the higher self, make. We do make those decisions about this body, and that decision-making process continues at that same higher level, past the time of birth and on throughout life, as we will discuss very soon. This is as good a time as any to point out, however, that God has told us in Genesis 2.7, or chapter 2, verse 7, when the newborn becomes a living soul. It says, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Very clear. A human being becomes a living soul at the first breath of life. I know that many who are recognized or considered as being in high authority have said that life begins at conception. But Genesis 2:7 is very plainly stated. It's very straightforward, and it leaves nothing to conclude except that the life of the embryo until the time of the first breath is an extension of the life of the mother. Let's now consider, however, returning to the task of explaining what happens after the birth of the child. Now, after the birth, decisions are made and guidance is given by that higher aspect of ourselves that is often called the higher self. A nudge here, an idea there, seeming like our own thoughts coming to us, but being given to us by that higher part of ourselves, come to us throughout our lives as the higher self guides us as needed, so that we will at least have the opportunity to make correctly those decisions that we have made incorrectly in times or even incarnations past. In other words, we can rest assured that the higher self will inevitably guide us to the life experiences and decision-making opportunities and circumstances that we need. The decisions that we make at a conscious level at those times, however, are up to the part of ourselves that has free will at the conscious level. That's why it's important to stay on the high road and do the right thing. If you've carefully listened to what's been stated above, you must conclude a very important fact. This life is not an accidental happening, and nothing in it is accidental. Now, let it be made clear, however, that this previous statement does not mean that we should spend all of our time minutely analyzing various aspects of every one of life's events. If that were done, we would have no time for anything else, and we wouldn't get much actual living accomplished. This life is meant to be lived so that we can have and benefit from the life experiences that are encountered each and every day. However, I should also mention here that this doesn't necessarily mean that we should live it up every day. Getting back to our subject, though, let us say that knowing that life is not an accident can allow us to realize that there may be, from time to time, events that are significant enough that we would be very wise to pray for guidance to approach and deal with them carefully and properly, thereby learning from them, if possible, any needed lessons. Use that knowledge wisely, therefore, as you travel on your journey through this life. Another aspect of this life about which there is rightful concern is the fact that there may be times in our lives when we feel overwhelmed by some of the dark times that may come into our lives and by the feelings that we may experience at such times. For some persons, the difficulty of meeting and dealing with such events seems greater than it does for others. There can be feelings of loneliness or inner emptiness that we may all experience at times. These can often be helped by the knowledge that although we may at times feel lonely, I will tell you with certainty that we are never truly alone. We all have unseen guides that are always with us. These unseen guides, sometimes called guardians, are constantly working with our own higher self to guide and watch over us throughout our lives. We will discuss these guides more at length in the essay on angels. The knowledge that we are never alone, however, should hopefully provide a great deal of comfort and reassurance to those who may be particularly troubled. It should also be pointed out that the feeling of inner emptiness can begin to be filled when we open up our minds and hearts more and more to truth and spiritual light and love and compassion, and invite those things into our lives. Our awareness that we are on a very special journey as seekers on the path can also go a long way toward helping to leave behind us any feelings of emptiness or loneliness. We must not forget, however, that meeting, overcoming, and mastering life's difficulties and problems, thereby learning the lessons associated with those difficulties and problems, are the reasons why we have chosen to come here and incarnate on this physical plane in the first place. That's why we're here. It is extremely tragic that there are some who, when beset by such difficulties, feel unable to cope, and as a result make the decision to take their own lives. In many instances, they do this because they do not realize two important facts. First, we will never be given problems that are more difficult to deal with than we have the capability to handle. It may not always seem that that's the case, but that's the case. The difficulty may be great, but it will never be beyond our ability. Those things which may seem to shake the very foundation of our world at the time that they are happening are very often the same events about which we may reminisce years later with a trace of a smile when we recall how devastating they seemed back then. Time can be a great healer. Secondly, taking one's own life means that the problems which brought that about have not been overcome, or much less mastered, and the needed lessons have therefore not been learned. This means that the higher self will eventually have to make the choice to reincarnate here and once again meet those same problems in a different life. This will continue to happen over and over again if necessary until we resolve these matters properly and have not simply run away from the problem without making a proper resolution. It should be noted also that there are additional difficulties, some of them karmic, that can be brought about by the willful taking of a life, even one's own life, and these things must also be considered. As you can see, taking one's own life solves nothing and saves us from nothing. Now, it should also be stated at this time, however, that I readily acknowledge the fact that there are persons who have taken their own lives because of their inability to think things out properly, due to chemical imbalance in their brain that may have been brought about by taking drugs, even prescription medications, and or alcohol into the body in such a way or at such a time that these substances cause or contribute to bringing about the creation of such chemical imbalance. Even in such cases, however, it is my belief that it would be exceedingly rare if such decisions which would lead to the imbalance made by the individual involved were made despite input from or the strong influence of the higher self. We are agents of free will, however, and perhaps such a person may, despite all the efforts of the higher self, succeed in carrying out the decisions leading to the chemical imbalance and the subsequent decision to take one's life, or the subsequent events that cause one's life to be lost as a result of the imbalance. Even with these things considered, however, it must still be pointed out that the additional difficulties that can be brought about by the taking of a life, even one's own, should always be taken into careful consideration by those persons who may be thinking that suicide could be a way out, when in fact it causes those same problems and events to be replayed and relived in a future life over and over again until they're properly resolved. As stated earlier, it solves nothing and saves us from nothing. When we properly consider the real purpose of the problems that we experience and the benefit gained from working through them until they are eventually mastered, it should help us to understand why it is always better to pray for greater strength, not for fewer problems. I thank you very much for joining me as you watch this video. I now invite you to watch the next video, which is on the subject of angels. Again, thank you.